The background material in this video can be viewed at thewaythetruithandthelife.net. More specific references will be given in the notes. I'm in Russia. It's October 13th, 2012, and I'm working on the foundation section of my website. And to make the transition in my mind and in my presentation from a childlike curiosity to a deep concern, which both modes of thinking are natural for me depending on what I'm working on. I enjoy so much just investigating how nature works to find out laws of physics or how some machine works, with a childlike curiosity since I was a child. I also have deep concern, and I move from one to the other. Also, in my thoughts as I try to put this presentation together, there are some things that seem mystical in my background that I don't take anything as mystical. There are things that are not well understood. One of them that stands out in my mind is an experiment done by the Russians as they were developing their space program to put Yuri Gagarin out into space. And they had the thought of, is there any reality to mental telepathy that it might serve as a backup system for communications in a space program? And they investigated this. One of the investigations that is reported is an experiment with a litter of rabbits taken into a submarine out into the oceans, and the litter was sacrificed at random times with no communication to the laboratory back in Russia, where the mother was being monitored for neurological activity electronically. And it was recorded when they the exact time that they sacrificed each of her litter as the submarine moved in the oceans. And the report is that the graph, like an electroencephalograph, of the rabbit monitoring showed they could tell exactly when each of its litter was sacrificed by some physiological response of the mother rabbit. I have experienced in my own life an experiment that I have no way of explaining. It was with one of my children randomly tossing a coin off the table onto a rug. Now, the coin had been tossed and put on the table and covered without my daughter looking at it, and she was about 11 at this time, and I was off in the far end of the joined kitchen living room area on the couch, and would write down what the coin was going to be, heads or tails, and she didn't know what the coin was going to be. I had no way of knowing. And yet, there were like 5 sets of 25, and every one of them I had over 20 of the correct. I believe there is some type of communications, whether electromagnetic, but this was precognitive. I don't understand that at all. It's hard for me to think in terms of laws of physics that something, there's all kinds of things that you can hear in modern physics that is an imaginary reality. I would just add here, the only thing that would make sense to me is that the awareness of the future could come from the laws of reality being so well articulated that it's not confusion, but it can be projected from what is. Now, in terms of like my daughter tossing that coin onto the rug, very hard to imagine that somehow in nature is the ability to communicate and calculate the outcomes of the future through so many things that to our mind are random. But that would be the line of thinking that I would take, that it's not magic. There are laws and detail, ability to keep track of time and event, to predict the future, and even when we're talking here, we're talking about human behavior being part of the projection of being able to predict the future. Given the situation, as I say this, I'm just amazed. I've spent quite a bit of time with realization of where Paul talks about being preordained to this or that. And as I understand now, and I see Doreen, our little 3-year-old granddaughter that lives with us here, that we're determining her future, whether she's able to care and the levels of care that she can develop into. She will be predestined, determined by her genetics and the environmental experiences that go through, especially while nerve growth factor is present in the various parts of her brain, what type of experiences she has to set up that neural synaptic network that will carry her through her life. So that's another sidetrack, but it does seem hard to and easy to see why some people bring in mysticism and magic, but I don't want to do that. Thank you. But at any rate, there are things I don't understand and that tend to give what would be interpreted as a mystical part of life. The experiences, harsh experiences, of course, was first my father being killed in an accident when I was 11, and the hardship after that with my older brother, and then helping my mother. And I would add here that at 13 my mother had remarried after 2 years and I was no longer needed. That's why I was free for the summers, and leaving home for the summer when I was 14 and when I was 15, working on a farm and then traveling. And in the summer I was 15, I traveled out to Arizona and down into Mexico. But while coming back, hitchhiking back from Arizona, there was a point where I had gotten off at a Y in the road. The man was going south to Houston or something like that, and I was traveling east and then heading back to New York. So there was just a Y in the road and nothing there. And in the direction I wanted to go, there wasn't a stop. And I was there all day without anybody stopping to pick me up. And it turned evening, not dark yet, coyotes howling, but I said a prayer. I was meditating and thinking about my father. My father was dead. When I could pray to my Father in heaven, and it was real to me because of my father being deceased, and thinking of him being in this place called heaven, whatever that was. And it was very comforting to me. But then I started hitchhiking in all directions, whatever. Finally got a ride backwards, but that's another story. But the next major experience for me was going in the Air Force and becoming a radio repairman without any high school background. I'd gone through junior high school to 9th grade and quit. I'd failed 2 years. Well, at 17, I was beaten by a drunken acting first sergeant coming back from his drinking and difficulties of his personal life. But I have a scar here from that. He had crashed my head into the tail fin of a 57 Ford. It was in 1957. At any rate, I was taken to the hospital and released, and I had terrible headaches. This acting first sergeant, who had nothing to do with my job as a ground radio repairman for radio and navigational aids equipment, had claimed he had tried to force me to go back to the base. I had just gotten off my second job and was at a coffee shop. That he was able to convince our acting commander, Lieutenant Oliphant, to put me on restriction because I fought back against him. And I was restricted to base. And I had terrible headaches. I thought it was due to the damage from my head being crashed into the car. And that was the foundation of me having difficulty with headaches. And I thought it was physiological due to the damage. And when they couldn't, this went on for about 3 months, and when they couldn't find a cause, I was sent for observations to the hospital was at Wright-Patterson Field in Ohio, the same place where Clinton met the president of Serbia, Milosevic, who he later betrayed. Now that comes up, I'll show you a little clip of what they did to a church when Clinton gave them the freedom to take over the Christian areas.
Policia c'hai, Mira Llapian kanë ardhur këtu te Kisha Ortodokse në Besjan për të shprehur revoltën e tyre ndaj ngjarjeve që kanë ndodhur në Kosovë. Mira Llapian kanë ardhur këtu te Kisha Ortodokse në Besjan për të shprehur revoltën e tyre ndaj ngjarjeve tragjike që kanë ndodhur në Kosovë. Mira protestues Llapian kanë dalur këtu te Kisha Ortodokse në Besjan dhe e dogjën atë për të shprehur revoltën e tyre ndaj ngjarjeve tragjike që kanë ndodhur ditë më parë në Kosovë.
Mos më mërzit hiç. Jo, mos më mërzit për kurrë ti mos tani. Nuk vret për çfarë vlar. Hajde. Ik bez... Drugi paket.
Testuesit ose diçka tjetër?
Gjithë çka kena mujt, i kena marrë, mos atë sigurisht për rrugë, e kena siguru rrugën, po tash.
Tamam, pej të profilit që shkon të shku mosha proteste se kemi këtë drejtë qytetit. Bashkëpunim me këta organizatorët, po tash i kthy këtë dhe
I was shocked to learn the background of this was the Muslims moving into Serbia. That in the Second World War they joined Hitler's army to help kill Jews and Roma and some Christians. But they got a growing foothold, and under communism many moved in, and after the breakup of communism they did the same thing that happened in the land of the seven churches. This was all kind of shocking, but and hard to understand. How do you destroy a destroyer? What they don't show, just like here in Chechnya, they don't show that that judges and peaceful imams and police are being killed now, and they're taking Russian prisoners, and they're slaves. That's in the Quran too, but it just seems like an unreal world. Then you got Hillary Clinton, whose husband betrayed Kosovo, and the people that were trying to protect these churches and their homeland. But at any rate, let me get back to my story, the tragedy that discovered. I drank. I worked in the Air Force. I worked my regular job, and I worked repairing televisions on the side, and I had a job and a custard stand. I drank a lot of coffee. I had always drank a lot of coffee after I went in the Air Force. And what I discovered after all the difficulties that I had gone through with the medical profession and having headaches, when you drink a lot of coffee and you stop drinking it, you get headaches. And they didn't know that. And I had been restricted, so I wasn't able to go to the coffee shop and get my coffee. But that's a whole nother story. But that's where a lot of my Wake Up Foundation came from, where I asked for help and I received terrible, shocking abuse, literally. At any rate, to get on with this introduction to the transition from just curiosity to deep concern about something that is causing and has caused murder to the point I learned in India over 150 million. That's what set the Roma free, or moved them off their land at any rate. And it's not bad people. It's a theocratic murdering cult that conditions robots. That is, if you look in the madrasas at the memorization of this, cut off their fingers and cut off their heads and use deception. Think about it. It's real, and it's growing and has been growing ever since 600 years after Jesus. It is a pyramid scheme that there's a reward for murdering or killing yourself, and there's a reward if you win the battle. You get the women and the booty. Just look at and listen to the video of the demonstrations in London, how they're going to get your women and your booty. At any rate, let's get on with it. And was sent to the hospital there. And I had many terrible experiences to see what psychiatry was like and learn about lobotomies and shock treatment and so forth. But I was reading my Bible in the shower one night, in the shower stall. The lights were on at night in the hospital ward, and I was in the shower stall where the lights were on, so I read my Bible, and I had a vision of going up into heaven, and it was like a table with a whole bunch of men sitting around, like God was there. And I was told, we brought you here because you needed it. The next time you're going to have to work your way up. Well, I believe that was Saturday night, and Sunday with one of the ward nurses, or not a nurse, but the attendant. I went with him he was a black man. I went with him to his Holiness Church in Dayton, Ohio, and where they spoke in tongues and so forth. But I was encouraged, and I come back and confronted the psychiatrist over the types of things I saw and the treatments they were doing. And he got angry with me and threw me in the locked ward. And the next day he started me on shock treatments. And that was a wake-up call. And I just wonder if I was being prepared that I could care about these things and try to make it a better world. But at any rate, that was a shocking experience, that this supposedly caregiver was brutalizing me. And that's another story that could be seen elsewhere. So it's not for glory, it's seeking the truth of matters and to make it a safer world for decent people to live and to help children to be raised so they can be innocent and decent. But my problem here is the transition. And I started with this video because to give the background, I was in research, nuclear ceramics at carborundum research, and I went to teaching physics as I went on to school. Got a degree in mathematical physics with a wife, 3 children, 2 mortgages, and a dog. But I went to teach physics, and fortunately they were teaching had of course as a laboratory learning experience. what a joy. Except that my wife divorced me and took my 3 children, my home, and my income. But that's another story. And I went on in the last, I've taught 23 years. In the last couple of years, it was one of the teachers, biology teacher, that had it was the breakup of the Soviet Union had happened, and he was going for summers to teach with a UN-sponsored program, a not-for-profit organization. A woman had started up, help native English speakers, helping young children in the former Soviet countries in language workshops for the summer. But the background to that was I had been so concerned about in the late 80s and 90s about the hardships going on. South Africa, I was afraid it was going to be a bloodbath, as the blacks were trying to get rid of the white authority structure. And I prayed very much for that, and the wonderful that they had such a good leader. I can't think of his name right now. He got out of prison. He had gotten a Nobel Prize. At any rate, he was a wonderful role model for healing and for the young men. But I had prayed about that. When my first wife died in 1987, I then went into a home church and openly professed as a Christian, where everybody gives a testimony, and meeting twice a week, Wednesday and Sunday morning, Wednesday night, Sunday morning. That this concern was an open part of my testimony and prayers. In a meeting, everybody had a testimony and a prayer. Well, then Nelson Mandela was the gentleman's name that did so much wonderful things for South Africa. That then the Soviet Union was breaking up, and I thought there was going to be a bloodbath. I had tutored and became personal friends with Tibor Chesley, one of the leaders of the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, which turned into a bloodbath, and he was escaped to England with a death penalty back in Hungary at the time. But then he came to America. But I was aware of how brutal that 56 revolution was, and how brutally the Russians had put down revolts, and how much cruelty had gone on in East Germany, and people being killed. I had friends that had in the International Institute. My stepfather was German. He had sponsored a German family over, and I became friends. Klaus Cortea was best man at his wedding. He enjoyed his sisters very much. But at any rate, many Germans had escaped, but there were many horror stories. I was so concerned about the breakup of the Soviet Union. It was in my prayers. I remember they had one of the 2x2 workers that stayed at my house overnight and was alarmed, like I was overly concerned. And what we have in many churches is, put it in God's hands. You don't just think on the nice things. Whatever things are beautiful, whatever things are loving. Well, of course I think on those things, but it doesn't mean that I'm an escapist and I'm into apathy that, it's all God's business. I just need to keep my head in the sand. No, I don't believe in that at all. we're part of God, and what God does is what people that love their source of existence do to make it a better world and to propagate. At any rate, this background of concern, and then teaching. I taught the summer of '97 in Lithuania, spoken English. I taught in Belarus the summer of '99 and was praying. And the way I found peace was to go back to Pekin, New York, where I had spent my early childhood hunting, fishing, trapping with my father, and working with raising chickens and pigs and training the dogs for hunting and so forth. I would never go to his grave. I would go to where we walked, and I felt something of the fellowship from the environment where he lived. And I have intuitive feelings, and I would have feelings of places where I was comfortable and places where I was not, and directions to turn that I felt that I should go in this direction. I've had these experiences, and whether it's foolishness or not, I had the motivation that kept somehow focused on Russia. And that led to my meeting Olga as a home Christian and marrying her. But then I thought, come to Russia and part of the year I'd be able to work on my physics. I was looking so forward to retirement. I retired in '99. In 2000, I married Olga, and my biggest concern was how can I get my math and physics library back and forth so I can work while I'm in Russia. And then, of course, the internet came along, and that's the need to carry a library is something people wouldn't understand today who hadn't lived before the computer and internet age. At any rate, the terrible, terrible shock of the killings going on here by Islamists. And Olga had grown up with the problem in Armenia and was well aware of it. And we were married in 2000, and while you had to go to Moscow and we registered, you had to wait a month and come back, and during that month, I show here a little video and some BBC writings of the horrific murders of people in the metro, the Moscow subway that we traveled and walked in, and where we walked through. But just unbelievable to me. In August 2000, Olga and I were in Moscow to sign for the month wait for our wedding. And it was at this time that one of the Moscow metro, that subway bombings took place. This bombing killed 8 and wounded a number of others. Just horrendous human devastation, people just being torn apart. And to imagine the grief and horror of those who were not directly involved, but having to try and help the survivors being brought out bleeding and some dying. Just unbelievable. I just couldn't imagine the human cruelty like this, and it had been going on in Olga's experience back even from her grandparents when they murdered so many Armenians in 1915. Her grandmother had saved one in the potato cellar under the kitchen floor. They weren't murdering Russians. They came across the river into the Russian territory looking for the Armenians that had escaped. So none of this was new to Olga. She was so glad to think of going to America, having a safe and secure place. In southern Russia, where we live, at the 90s, late 90s, the Chechens were coming through. They were killing at the Minbody airport, a few miles away. They had confiscated planes. They had all kinds of horror. It's still going on. 5 miles from here, in Easter, and I came last spring. They were gonna, for an Easter present, gonna blow up a church full of worshippers. But just hard to think that the book that teaches that this is a service to Allah would not be exposed as the foundation of something that's harming so many people and destroying children to turn them into robots. It's just unbelievable to me. But all this horror, and then Olga and I had gone south for a month to wait for our wedding, which was on September 9th. And we came back to Moscow, and we were married and looking forward with so much joy to going to America. But we went through where all these people were murdered the month before, in August 2000. And this is a picture of Olga's cousin Ludmila holding my computer, briefcase with computer, and a picture of her and Olga that I took. That to our left here was a picture of all those that had been murdered at this spot, but they wouldn't allow pictures. Murder victims' pictures and flowers were there, but they, out of respect, they didn't allow any pictures to be taken of that area. So we took this just as a reminder. Thankful that we're safe, but never can feel the same peace again. That I never knew such horror existed, that people did this to people and called it a religion. Why don't our leaders wake up and say the truth? That this book is the foundation of a theocratic murdering cult. And now we'll get on with it. And the apartment that had blown up, now that probably was the way that the non-Islamists got the support from the Russian people to deal with the Islamists. That I'm not going to judge that situation. It's horrendous every day here. There are Russian slaves in Saudi Arabia. There's a woman advocating that they should bring their Russian sex slaves, and that's a good thing because then they don't corrupt the Muslim women.
فقلت شنو قانون الجواري؟ فقالوا قانون الجواري يعني قال لي المفتي قانون الجواري إن لازم تكون دولة مسلمة غازية، دولة مسيحية أو دولة غير ليست على دين، ليست على الدين الإسلامي، وأسرى، يعني لازم يكون أسرى حرب. يعني قلت هل هو حرام؟ قال لا، بالدين مو حرام. الجواري ليس بالدين حرام، بالعكس الجارية قانونها غير عن قانون الحرة. الحرة عورتها كلها إلا وجهها ويدها، أما الجارية من السر وتحت، يعني تختلف جدا عن الحرة. والحرة لازم بعقد زواج، وهذا الجارية لا، فقط يشتريها وخلاص كأنها يعني تزوجها، فتختلف الجارية عن الحرة. طبعا هم كذلك هنا بالكويت سألت ناس مختصين متدينين وهذا، فقالوا لي صح مشكلة استغفر الله يا ربي الرجل أو الرجل على دين، يعني مو إلا ملتزم حيل، يعني كل رجل سوي بدينه يعني ويكون عنده خير. الحل الوحيد إنه لازم يكون عنده يعني إذا لا يريد أن يأتي نساء بالحرام، يعني إذا كان يعني مبتلى بالفتنة، إنه يعني هذا هو الموضوع، إنه يعني يشتري جواري. أنا صراحة أتمنى أن يسنون قانون لهذه الفئة ويفتحون يعني الباب لهذا، مثل ما فتحوا باب الخدم المكاتب وهذا، يفتحون باب الجواري ويسنون قانون صحيح. يعني إحنا ما نبي عيالنا يعني يضعون بالهاوية استغفر الله يا ربي اللهم اني استغفرك واتوب اليك بالزنا والقاذورات هذه. وان شاء الله يا ربي يا كريم خير. وانا الصراحه انا الدول اللي اشوف انها يعني مثل شيشان اللي هي بين حرب وبين دوله ثانيه، اكيد في في اسرى، فروحوا اشتروا هذول الاسرى. يعني مو افضل يذبحهم الجوع هناك، روحوا اشتروهم وش اسمه شغلوا هذا وبيعوهم على اللي التجار بالكويت.
But that's another story. The Russians have the history of seeing their young men come out feeble, being discovered as slaves and just fed enough to be able to do their work but not escape. That's another story. The horrendousness, and I had no idea about Islam, as I had Muslim friends at the university, and I have nothing against people, but this, when I was shocked into looking into the Quran, and the Quran does teach to murder the unbeliever. If they don't convert, cut off their fingers, cut off their heads. Read Surah 9. And then that it's deceptive, and that's okay. And the nice surahs don't mean anything because there's a surah of abrogation, I think number 2. And the surahs are mixed up so the uninitiated read nice things and they don't count. The surah of abrogation is after Muhammad personally beheaded 600 Jews, I think it was the Qurayza tribe, for not helping him against his Arab, polytheistic Arab tribe that he had built an army and come back to fight against. But then to understand that children are indoctrinated with this teaching to murder or even die, commit suicide for this God, Allah. I just couldn't get my mind around it, and when I talked to people about it, of course, Olga was aware of this from back when her grandfather, back in the late 1800s, he made wagon wheels in Armenia, and so, was delivering one to a Muslim customer, invited in, and her grandfather asked the Muslim, why do you steal from us? Because the farms had to be guarded at night. The Muslims would steal. And the man told him, it's in our book. You owe us. We're not stealing. You owe us. And the same they interpret killing a non-Muslim. They're not murdering. It's in the book. They're serving Allah. They're going to get a reward. But I did discover that this is being indoctrinated. Is so like why so many murders in Pakistan. Since I want to mention, Olga was so glad to go to America as a safe place, and the next year 9/11 it destroyed something for her, and worldwide no more place where there's peace and respect and security. That's another story too. Where am I going with this? I studied and I found out Roma came from 1,000 years ago, that when the Muslims were murdering in India and Pakistan and Kazakhstan, that they were Indians that had escaped and had fought for generations, pushed off their land, and lost any sense of a homeland and drifted into the land of the 7 churches, mainly where Christians were, and found safety among the Christians. until the Turks came and murdered all the ones that wouldn't convert to Islam and took over the land of the seven churches. That all shocked me. That they was over 150 million murdered in Hindustan, India, and that Pakistan area. Just unbelievable. I was brought up to that the Catholic Church was the evil corrupter. Of course, I've come to find out there are masculine and feminine goofinesses, like the socialism, feminine socialism, communism, and masculine socialism, fascism, or Islamofascism. But that the mainstay of the Catholic Church historically was the corruption of women's liberation, serving women as a power tool against men. They don't need it now in America, so the Catholic Church is going down, but that's another story too. So this whole purpose of this video is to bring into some focus the extremes of just simple childlike curiosity and the joy of life and exploring, and the deep concern to understand the things that are destroying a healthy future and indoctrinating children to murder and commit suicide, and how to deal with it, and the equally shocking power of women's liberation, that they're murdering infants at a higher rate. There's no comparison. Well, it's true that Islam has murdered over 200 million in its 1400 years. The murder rate on the average is only around 200,000, where socialism, when it had control in Russia, murdered at a much 5 times higher rate per year. And Islamofascism, the Muslims helping the Nazis kill, 10 times worse than communism. But look at abortion, the annual murder rate by abortion, 50 million a year. What is more hazardous to healthy life? Of course, Islam is terrible. It's conscious adult, but so is the extremes of feminine socialism and masculine Islamofascism. But let's find a way to protect children, that they're raised in a healthy home, that it's a crime to have children by accident and then murder them. But that's another thing. Let's get on with it. Socialism is much more deadly than Islam, and whether it's Nazism or communism, the hatred for the class structure, the hatred for the haves and the have-nots, and the power and the not power, and the would-be power. But on one side of feminine domination in communism, on the other side of masculine domination. And it turns out the Catholic Church ends up in the feminine category of socialism. And that's where it comes to worshiping the Mother of God. That's another story. The evil of Islam was not part of my education. I didn't understand it, and I studied Spain and realized, and here, because the Catholic Church was demonized. I grew up in a Lutheran farm area, German background farm, and my background was Swedish. But the corruption of Christianity by the Catholic Church was the main evil in that world. Nothing about Islam. And demonizing the Catholic Church, then what did they call it when they took back Spain and they had the Inquisition and forced them to convert back to Christianity if they'd converted, and forced the Muslims out, and forced the Jews, who had been the servants of the Muslims in between the Christians and the Muslims and doing their dirty work, and forced them to convert to Christianity. Or sentenced them to death. But all the brutality was learned from 1,000 years of domination by the Quran. And the beheading, I went to Paraguay and Mexico, and here's these men. It's easy for them to kill somebody else, beheading, and men, very many, more than one wife. They have just another apartment for if they have the money to afford it. But that's just the leftover from Islam. Spain was dominated by Muslims for 700 years. It was forced out the same year that Columbus discovered America. So what you have then, after the Inquisition had forced out Islam and taken back over the cathedrals that they had co-opted, what you had was a Quranic culture with a Christian name. Multiple wives, beheading, and a class structure. Like the Muslims had their class and the lower class. So the Spanish went to South America, and with the background of Muslims bringing slaves into Spain was just part of their culture. And I never understood. It was not part of my education. And the first few years of American history was being paid to the Diet of Algiers. Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson went to Paris, France, and paid money to Diet of Algiers to let our ships go in to get some of the ship crew back that hadn't been murdered or just enslaved in the Mediterranean. That's another story, but it just wasn't part of my background. It wasn't in the books I'd read. But and Thomas Jefferson, wanting to understand the enemy, had the Quran put into English, and now we've got two members of Congress that have taken their oath of office on this Quran, which says cut off their fingers, cut off their heads after the holy months if they don't convert to Islam. Now there are peaceful verses about people of the book, Christians and Jews, but that was before the Surah of Abrogation, where Allah said he can change his mind, and what he said last is what counts. And children are made into robots, and I discovered the foundation of that was Jewish. I'll go into all of these things. And I believe the solution to a problem is, first of all, understanding it completely. And awareness. This using Christianity as an escape from reality, put it all in God's hands. In God we live and move and have our being. We're part of God. And if we're not going to serve the next generation, they're cursed. If we're not going to care for babies that they can grow in levels of ability to care and have responsibility, humanity hasn't got much of a choice. Again, quickly, that this planet has escaped the destruction of life for something like 2 million years. the building process, 2 billion years, human life, in the order of 2 million years, is a miracle of time and chance. And it's not going to last forever. And the greatest thing we could do is make a safe place for intelligent life to exist. And as far as the meaning of life, it has to do with group behavior. Living alone as an intelligent being is not fun. At any rate, to explore these issues and put them in order is my purpose here. And then to get down to enjoying physics and discovering God's laws of physical reality and setting a framework, an overview that fits the puzzle together in depth of space, in depth of detail, and over this expanse of time, that we can understand reality and enjoy this awareness that we have an opportunity for fellowship. That's my hope and prayer, and this purpose of this was to make the sense out of the going from simple joy of investigating to deep concern that it's a crisis. I hope that you're willing to wake up and be part of the solution. Thank you.